A deal that effectively halves the Tasmanian forest industry is set to be signed this weekend. It has federal backing, giving more than $250 million to the industry and the communities that will be most affected. It's meant to be the start of a new era, bringing about peace between conservationists and loggers. But at this stage, that doesn't look likely. Martin Cudahy reports.
It's the middle of a wet and misty winter in Tasmania's southern forests. Snow-capped mountains feed rushing streams and rivers. In the Upper Florentine, a hardy group of environmental protesters is braving the elements.
It gets pretty cold in the winter, but it's also one of the most beautiful times when it's snowing and the forest looks beautiful in the snow. But yeah, it can get pretty tough out here.
For the past 4 years, there have always been members of Still Wild, Still Threatened at this camp. They want this valley to become a national park. It's less than 10 kilometres from World Heritage Area. The group uses a variety of methods to draw attention to its cause, including frontline action. In early 2009, more than a dozen people were arrested when they tried to enter an exclusion zone to stop logging. These days, the passion is still there, but things are a little quieter at Camp Flozza. Sunday is the deadline for an agreement that's meant to bring peace to Tasmania's forests and end the need for camps like this one. Essentially, the agreement will halve the number of people employed in forestry and in return provide tens of millions of dollars in compensation. 430,000 hectares of high conservation value forests will be immediately protected in informal reserves. But that's not good enough for these protesters. They want a further 140,000 hectares included in the deal.
It's not a comprehensive plan, it's just protecting a small amount of forest, or a relatively small amount of forest when you look at the wilderness that's out here. So there's a huge amount of forest that's not protected and that's not going to be protected under this deal.
To me, it's just such bloody minors, and there's no middle ground anywhere. As soon as you concede more area, next minute we're back on the same track again.
Unions, timber workers and conservationists have worked on the deal for the past 18 months, and they all agreed to a statement of principles late last year. Unions say this final hurdle is a frustrating sticking point.
We always knew that there will be some people who are stuck in the old ways. You know, there's old people trying to fight old wars here. Some people need to move on.
The Commonwealth will spend $85 million to help forestry workers transition out of the industry and compensate those who've lost their jobs. $120 million will be spent in regional communities to help diversify their economies. The Prime Minister, Julia Gillard, and Tasmania's Premier, Lara Giddings, personally negotiated the latest agreement. But the federal influence over the heads of agreement has drawn criticism from the Greens leader, Nick McKim.
To think that you could come into town, crack a few heads together and resolve what's been a very difficult and divisive debate in Tasmania for decades, and to think that you could resolve that in 24 or 36 hours, I think was quite naive. And ultimately what we're doing now is having to come in and try and pick up the pieces, if you like.
Legislation will be presented in the first 6 months of next year to move forests into better levels of protection. It would seem to me, once again, a very strange result indeed if Mr McKim and his political party voted against that.
An intergovernmental agreement is scheduled to be signed this weekend. At this stage, it won't have the backing of the Greens.
There is very little or no certainty around the conservation outcomes, and particularly new national parks that we have out of this process, but things are still moving forward.
This is not a Greens versus workers debate. This is about trying to grab some opportunities through dialogue and trying to work collectively together to establish a better space for the industry going forward.
South of Hobart, at Terenius Timber, these logs are being turned into hardwood decking. The wood, commonly known as yellow gum, comes from native forests in the Central Highlands. The owner of the sawmill, Robert Terenius, isn't optimistic about the weekend deadline.
The industry's given so much over the years, given up so much production forests. We're now reduced to a very small area, and still they persist. So I don't think there's going to be any peace in our forests, as they have said, till the last chainsaw stops operating in the native forests.
Robert Terenius has been involved in the timber industry for more than 30 years, but in the last 6 months his workforce has almost halved. He wants green groups to stop being so hard-nosed.
Well, I think they should actually start thinking about the people that are in the industry, and what alternatives have they got for employment for those people. I mean, we've got rural areas that are really suffering now, that have historically been supplying the workers for the timber industry.
Back in the Florentine, there is a determination to stay until this area is transformed into a national park. But even with the weekend deadline looming and the promise of peace in the forests, it's unlikely this latest agreement will end the divisive debate.
Until the forest is actually protected, then we need to be out here standing up for these forests.
We have a chance of having a sustainable future. If we do not, this industry will have no future.
Martin Cudahy reporting from Hobart.